On July 14, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation confirmed the lower Colorado River is still under a Tier 1 shortage. Arizona loses 320,000 acre-feet. Nevada loses 21,000. Mexico loses 80,000. And the biggest user of Colorado River water in the United States, a farming district in the California desert that grows much of the produce in American grocery stores, loses nothing, not 1 acre-foot, by law. But that district is drying its own fields anyway, on purpose, and the reason it is doing that ends on December 31st. The district is the Imperial Irrigation District. It holds rights to roughly 3.1 million acre-feet of Colorado River water every year. That is more water than the whole state of Arizona is allowed to take. It is more than 10 times Nevada's full share. It waters close to 500,000 acres of desert that gets under 3 inches of rain in a normal year and has no usable water underground. 7 states depend on this river, 40 million people, 30 tribal nations, and 5.5 million acres of farmland that grow roughly 15% of American farm goods and close to 90% of the winter vegetables that reach grocery store shelves between November and March. The rules holding all of that together run out at midnight on December 31st, 2026. What nobody outside the basin understands is that the cuts making headlines and the cuts happening in the fields are 2 completely different systems. One is law, one is a paycheck, and only one of them is going away. Imperial Valley, California, 1901. The California Development Company cuts a channel out of the Colorado River just above the Mexican border and runs it west into a dry pit more than 200 feet below sea level. Water arrives in a place that has never held any. Within 4 years, roughly 10,000 people are farming ground that had been bare salt flat. Then the river takes the canal. In 1905, spring floods blow out the opening, and the whole Colorado River turns west into the Salton Sink. It runs there for about 18 months before railroad crews finally choke it off with rock in 1907. What is left behind is the Salton Sea, the largest lake in California, made entirely by accident. That is the relationship this valley has with this river. It arrived violently, it built a farming economy out of nothing, and it left a body of water that nobody planned for and nobody has figured out what to do with since. The Imperial Irrigation District forms in 1911 to run what the private company could not. And because Western water law runs on a rule called first in time, first in right, the date on those first water takings turns into the biggest asset the valley owns. Bigger than the soil, and this valley has some of the best soil in the country. 21 years later, the 7 basin states signed the Colorado River Compact. 27 years later, the Boulder Canyon Project Act splits the lower basin's 7.5 million acre-feet 3 ways. California gets 4.4 million, Arizona gets 2.8 million, Nevada gets 300,000. Then, in 1931, California's own agencies divide their 4.4 million among themselves in a paper called the 7-Party Agreement. The Imperial Irrigation District lands in the 3rd spot in line. Los Angeles and San Diego, through the Metropolitan Water District, land in 4th. That single line of ranking is why a Tier 1 shortage in 2026 lands on Phoenix and Las Vegas and does not touch a single alfalfa field near Brawley. The district has given water up before. It just never gave up the right to it. In October of 2003, after the federal government cut California off from the extra Colorado water it had been quietly living on for years, the state's agencies signed the Quantification Settlement Agreement. It capped the Imperial Irrigation District at 3.1 million acre-feet and set up the largest farm-to-city water handoff in American history. Water that had been growing hay and lettuce would instead run to San Diego County, building up over roughly 2 decades toward 200,000 acre-feet a year. With another block sent to the Coachella Valley, the valley got paid, San Diego got supply, and the Salton Sea, which had been kept alive for 100 years by the runoff coming off those fields, got a countdown. Makeup water was piped in to slow the retreat, and those flows ran out at the start of 2018. The sea has been dropping faster ever since. Every water-saving deal in the Imperial Valley since then has worked the same way. Somebody upstream gets water, somebody in the valley gets a check, and the sea gets smaller. August 2021. The federal government declares the first shortage in the history of the Colorado River. Tier 1 takes effect the following January. Arizona and Nevada take it. California takes nothing. July 2022, Lake Mead falls to roughly 1,040 feet above sea level, the lowest the reservoir has ever been since it began filling behind Hoover Dam in the 1930s. Reclamation tells the states to find 2 to 4 million acre-feet of cuts. The states missed the deadline. They missed the next one too. May 2023. A deal finally lands. Arizona, California, and Nevada agree to save 3 million acre-feet through the end of 2026, with more than half of that coming out of California. The federal government puts up $1.2 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act to pay for it. And here is the piece that matters. The Imperial Irrigation District signs on by choice. Its board agrees to leave up to 700,000 acre-feet in Lake Mead through 2026, with reclamation paying for water savings of up to 300,000 acre-feet a year from 2024 forward. The district's legal right never changes, not one line of it. What changes is that Washington starts paying Imperial Valley farmers to not use water they are fully allowed to use. That is the deal holding up the largest reservoir in the United States right now. Not a rule, a trade. And it worked. That is the part that gets lost. In 2023, lower basin water use dropped to its lowest level since 1983. 40 years of growth in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, and the 3 states below Hoover Dam were using less river water than they had before most of that growth happened. Arizona alone has put more than 5.5 million acre-feet into Lake Mead since 2014. Brenda Berman, general manager of the Central Arizona Project, laid out the 2026 cuts plainly and said the basin must stay committed to protecting the river. The commitment is not in question. The money is. August 2025. Reclamation confirms Tier 1 again for 2026 and forecasts Lake Mead sitting at 1,055.88 feet on the 1st of January, about 20 feet under the shortage line. January 9th, 2026. The Bureau releases its draft environmental impact statement for how the river should be run after the rules run out. More than 18,000 public comments come back. February 14th, 2026. The 7 states blow their deadline. John Ensminger, general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority and Nevada's chief negotiator, puts it on the record. The states have, quote, failed to reach an agreement to collectively protect our respective communities and economies. Nobody was close. Now zoom out from the bargaining table, because the river was not waiting for anyone. The Imperial Valley sits in the far southeast corner of California, below sea level, boxed in by mountains on 3 sides and the Mexican border on the 4th. It gets less rain than almost any farmed ground in North America. There is no underground water to fall back on, no second reservoir either, just one canal. The All-American Canal runs 80 miles west from Imperial Dam along the Arizona border, carrying more water than most rivers in the eastern United States, and every acre of green in that valley exists because of it. Cut the canal and the valley is desert again in a single season. What grows there is worth about $2.9 billion a year. Lettuce, broccoli, carrots, spinach, cabbage, celery, cilantro, onions, melons. In January, when the rest of the country is frozen, this valley and its neighbors in Yuma and Coachella are the reason a grocery store in Minneapolis has a produce section at all. But by acreage, vegetables are not what takes the most ground. Cattle feed does. Roughly 85,000 acres of the Imperial Valley are planted in alfalfa, close to 1/3 of the district's watered ground. And alfalfa in that heat can drink as much as 10 acre-feet per acre per year. The valley's alfalfa alone uses more than 400,000 acre-feet every year. That is more water every year than the whole state of Nevada is allowed to take from the Colorado River. So the question everyone asks is clear. Why not just stop growing it? The answer is in how the river itself works, and it is worse than the crop choice. The Colorado River Compact of 1922 split 15 million acre-feet between the upper and lower basins, and a 1944 treaty later added 1.5 million more for Mexico. 16.5 million acre-feet of promises total. Those numbers came from river flow records taken during what tree ring studies later showed was one of the wettest stretches in more than 500 years. The 1900s turned out to average about 15.2 million acre-feet of natural flow, Since 2000, it has averaged roughly 12.3 million. The promises on paper were always bigger than the water. It just took 100 years for the gap to show. On top of that sits what water managers call the structural deficit. The lower basin uses about 1.2 million acre-feet more each year than arrives from Lake Powell and side streams, because water lost to the sun and to leaky canals below Hoover Dam was never charged to anyone. Nobody's share covers it, so Lake Mead pays, quietly, every single year, even in a good year. And then there is the newest problem, the one the forecasts kept missing. Since 2000, snowpack readings in the Rockies have kept predicting more water than the river delivered. Daniel Hogan, a doctoral researcher in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Washington, led the work that found where it goes. Drier springs mean fewer clouds and more sun, and plants up in the high country wake early and pull hard on the melt before it ever reaches a stream. Hogan described the plants as, quote, like giant straws, all drawing on the snowpack. Roughly 70% of the missing water traces back to that. Snow turning straight into vapor, the old suspect, accounts for about 10%. The mountains are not just holding less snow. The ground is grabbing more of what melts. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water systems, drought, and infrastructure failure every week with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. While the states were failing to agree on paper, the fields were already going brown. Here is what the deficit irrigation program looks like on the ground. A grower with a field of alfalfa signs up, and at the peak of summer, when temperatures in the valley run past 110 degrees, he shuts the water off for up to 60 days. The crop goes to sleep. The leaves brown out. He skips 1 or 2 harvests that were going to be his worst of the year anyway. The roots live. In the fall, the water comes back on and the field recovers. He gets paid for the water he did not use. Tina Shields, water department manager for the Imperial Irrigation District, has been blunt about how the valley feels about drying out whole fields for a season. Quote, "We don't like to do fallowing down here. Farmers signed up anyway. At least 80% of qualifying farms joined, helped along by hay prices that had already crashed." On January 20th, 2026, the district's board approved the program for a 3rd year. By the end of 2026, the district expects its deficit irrigation and on-farm efficiency programs to have left more than 800,000 acre-feet in Lake Mead over 4 years. That is enough water to raise the top of the largest reservoir in America by as much as 12 feet. 12 feet of Lake Mead, bought and paid for. Pay attention to the calendar on that, because it is the whole story. The deal paying for all of it runs through 2026 and stops. Colorado River water going to the district goes back to the old amounts, starting in 2027. Meanwhile, the reservoir kept falling. The July 14th, 2026 study forecasts Lake Mead at 1,037.3, 1 feet on December 31st. Water flowing into Lake Powell for the year is forecast at 3.5 million acre-feet, about 36% of normal. In April, Reclamation reported the whole system holding roughly 36% of what it can, after the lowest snowpack on record, and a March that broke heat records across the basin. Earlier forecasts showed Mead touching 1,040 feet this summer, matching the all-time low, and falling toward 1,011 feet by May of 2028. There is one more thing buried in that plan that almost nobody outside the bargaining rooms has read. Since the 2007 rules, lower basin agencies have been able to bank saved water inside Lake Mead as something called intentionally created surplus, a savings account they can pull from later. The 2019 Drought Plan added a second version of it with its own rules. Starting in 2027, those savings would be charged 3% a year for water lost to the sun. The savings account starts losing value just by sitting there. And the Imperial Irrigation District, which was shut out of that system completely when the drought contingency plan was written, would finally get a way in. Metropolitan's Colorado River policy manager Shanti Rossett told her board in May that the district being shut out had been one of the main breaking points in the 2019 talks. 7 years later, the district that takes no required cuts is being offered a seat at the table where the cuts are stored. Nobody has explained yet what it is expected to bring. So what happens when the paid deal ends and the required one has not been replaced? First, the field. Under the joint plan, Arizona, California, and Nevada sent to reclamation on May 1st, 2026. The lower basin would take 1.25 million acre-feet in cuts per year for 2027 and 2028. Arizona takes 760,000. California takes 440,000. Nevada takes 50,000. California has never taken a required shortage cut in the history of the river. Second, the district. Jamie Asbury, general manager of the Imperial Irrigation District, wrote to growers and water users across the valley on May 2, 2026, and was careful about what she agreed to. Quote, IID supports California advancing this proposal for federal consideration at this time, supports moving it forward, not agrees to take the hit. Any taking part, she said firmly, stays by choice and stays built to protect the district's senior rights. Third, the town. Brawley, El Centro, Calexico, Holtville. Imperial County already runs one of the highest jobless rates in California. Drying fields for 60 days costs the valley a couple of harvest days. Drying them for good costs, it harvest crews, equipment dealers, hay haulers, and packing shed shifts. Fourth, the Salton Sea. Every acre-foot saved in the Imperial Valley is an acre-foot that does not run off the fields and into that lake. The sea has been shrinking for 2 decades, and as it pulls back, it lays bare a lake bed loaded with 100 years of farm chemicals and salt. Wind picks that up. Imperial County has among the worst childhood asthma hospital rates in the state, and the bare lake bed keeps growing. Fifth, the grocery store. If 440,000 acre-feet come out of California farming, and a big share of it comes out of the valley that grows the nation's winter produce, the cost shows up in January, in every state, at the checkout. And sixth, the dam. Reclamation put Lake Mead at about 33% full, and Lake Powell at about 27% earlier this year, and both have fallen since. Metropolitan Water District struck a $65 million federal deal to leave water in Mead just to protect the power made at Hoover Dam. The Lower Basin Plan would force reclamation to officially talk with the states the moment any 24-month study forecasts Mead dropping below 1,010 feet. This has happened before, when the river was asked to do more than it can. In 1922, the men who wrote the compact had about 2 decades of river flow records, and no idea they had measured a rare wet run. They wrote a number into law. Every crisis since, the mid-century dry years, the 2002 low, the 2022 emergency, has been the system slowly finding out that the number was wrong and refusing to open it back up. And in 1963, when Arizona and California finally took their fight to the Supreme Court, the ruling did not touch the math either. It split the main river, backed up the Boulder Canyon numbers, and locked in what the court called present perfected rights. When those rights were finally written out in the final court order years later, the Imperial Irrigation District showed up with a priority date of 1901. 63 years of drought, growth, and deal-making since then, and that date has never moved. The 2007 rules were supposed to buy time. They bought 19 years. The 2019 Drought Contingency Plan was supposed to fix the structural deficit. Brad Udall, a water and climate scientist at Colorado State University, warned at the time that it would hold only if flows did not fall much further. They fell further. The $1.2 billion from 2023 was supposed to bridge the gap to a lasting deal. The bridge ends this December, and the lasting deal does not exist yet. Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, has said the department cannot wait for everyone to agree and plans to finish the post-2026 operating rules by October 1st, 2026, adding that, quote, a fair compromise with shared responsibility remains within reach. That leaves a handful of questions with no answers in the record. What happens on January 1st, 2027, if the rules are finished, but the separate contracts that turn them into real, enforced cuts are not signed? Who takes the cut if the biggest user only takes part by choice and the money is gone? Does a district holding rights from 1901 accept a required cut for the first time in 125 years? Or does it go to court? And if it goes to court, what happens to Lake Mead while the case waits? The data does not answer any of that yet. What the data does say is this. Tier 1 remains in effect. Arizona is short 320,000 acre-feet. Nevada is short 21,000. Mexico is short 80,000. And the Imperial Irrigation District's 2026 water deliveries are unchanged, exactly as written. Right now, somewhere between Brawley and Calipatria, a farm gate is standing open and water is running down a concrete ditch into a field of alfalfa, legally, on a right written in 1901. 2 fields over, a second gate is shut, and the crop behind it is brown and dry, because a check cleared. That gate stays shut until the money runs out. There are 155 days left on it, and the water in the open ditch keeps moving.